Hello, we are live and we are coming to you for our Cinema Lab presented by Grand Rapids Community Media Center and Wealthy Theater. We are excited to have you guys. My name is Virginia Anzengruber and I am the founder of Screen Club, which is the sister program for Cinema Lab. And with me tonight, we've got a fantastic trio of gentlemen, two with facial hair, one with, I think, facial hair, but I can't tell because of the way that the lighting's hitting you. No offense if you're really trying to work on some stubble there. Do you guys want to go around and introduce yourselves and say hello to the fine people?
Sure. I'm Caleb Dillon. I'm the front of house manager at Wealthy Theater. Not that anybody's been there in a while. That's okay. We can all virtually visit together and spend some good time together here at the Overlook Hotel.
Hey, pointing to me. All right, I'll go next. My name is Chris Kotcher. I have been summoned by Hayes to speak next. I'm the Technical Services Director for Community Media Center, Wealthy Theater. Big fan of movies and cinema, and also an occasional actor and pseudo filmmaker of my own. So I'm grateful to be here. I'll be clicking buttons in the background, occasionally disappearing, occasionally coming back, filling in for the mighty Sarah Naraki, who couldn't be here tonight. Cheers to Sarah.
Now, Chris, will your beard grow every time that you pop back on, like Tim Allen in the Santa Claus? Like, is it just gonna be a little bit more and more?
There will be some continuity errors in my image in my square.
Excellent.
Keep an eye out for some Easter eggs and potential hair growth. We'll see.
Nice.
Thanks for having me.
I can't follow that.
Yeah, you must.
Yeah, but I've got to. How's it going out there, y'all? My name's Hayes Griffin. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Former station manager at WYCE, the best radio station on the planet. You should totally listen to that radio station because we are part of the Grand Rapids Community Media Center. But here tonight to talk about avant-garde music with you. So, yeah, let's do it.
Wonderful. Well, I am really excited because I know that this is a big fan favorite of Caleb's, who is usually a fount of knowledge. And for this, I feel like is even more because of the texts and emails that I've been getting this week of just the excitement overflowing, much like the blood out of the elevators, to just pour into our audience with knowledge from this film. I believe it was from 1980. It was based on a novel by Stephen King, directed by Stanley Kubrick, and starring Shelley Duvall and Jack Nicholson. And I guess let's just get right into it, guys. What is your experience with this film in particular, but then also what is your experience with Stanley Kubrick cinema in general and his kind of filmography? Caleb, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I will start by correcting you a bit, which is to say I hadn't seen this film in a really long time. I had probably only seen it twice, I'm going to say over a decade ago. And I kind of felt like I vaguely remembered it, and I didn't remember liking it that much, to be honest. Huge fan of other Kubrick joints, but I just remember this one not really hitting me. So I was excited to do this episode specifically for a good reason to rewatch and dive in, because it's an extremely deep dive when you want to go down the deepest rabbit hole I've ever been on, except for maybe Twin Peaks, which we'll get into later as well. So as you know, I like to commit to the bit, and I watched this 3 times in the last 2 weeks, including rewatching the Room 237 documentary, full-length commentaries behind the scenes, and just endless amounts of YouTube film analysis. So I am looking forward to being released from this horrific prison that I really enjoyed at the same time. And yeah, I would say that before I even saw this movie, I don't know if you guys had the same experience, but I feel like as a kid, I knew what this movie was way before I ever even saw it, because it was such an endlessly parodied thing, whether it was Simpsons classic Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episode, or you would just, I mean, you'd see it parodied on commercials and all this stuff. And I feel like, I don't know how at that time we all just knew what stuff was when we saw it referenced a lot more than nowadays or something. But I definitely felt like I'd seen this before I'd seen it. So yeah, I would say that I really, really enjoyed getting into it this time. I knew that there was a lot of mystery and a lot of layers and a lot of conspiracies involved, but I had no idea it would be this wild. So,
Hayes, what about you?
Yeah, this is probably one of the earliest kind of like psycho thriller horror film experiences that I had as a child. I remember watching this with my father, who, Dad, if you're watching, you'd let me watch way too many movies that I shouldn't have been watching at that age, but God love you, because now I feel like I'm all the better for it, you know? But yeah.
Gotta love a bad dad.
No, my dad's the
Speaking
best.
of, oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it was definitely one of the first horror films that you can say that I watched. But I had kind of an interesting second round of kind of interest in the film later in life, just because of the music. And when I went to graduate school, I was exposed to a bunch of names and a bunch of styles of music that I had no idea about. A lot of them largely lumped under the term avant-garde music. You know what I mean? It's essentially just a catch-all term for anything that doesn't adhere to like standard musical rules, you know? And a lot of the compositions featured in this film are like the legendary ones at like peak moments in the film are from like famous avant-garde composers. So it was cool to kind of like trace that thread back through the movie as I like got into school and college and stuff. So that's kind of my relationship with it.
And Chris, what about you? I know you said you've watched Kubrick a fair amount. I don't know. Do you have a favorite film? What's your experience with Kubrick?
My favorite Kubrick has got to be, that's a tough one. For a long time, it was Dr. Strangelove. I don't think I can think of any other comedy that is like that movie. There is a tone in that film that that I just can't get enough of. Not to go too much in a different direction as far as Kubrick goes. I've seen most of his later works. I've not seen a lot of his early works. I'm a huge fan of 2001, of course, especially if you ever get a chance to see it in a theater when those chances are available again. I can't recommend it enough. Kubrick, I saw a handful of Kubrick films when I was in high school, and I watched all of them on my small TV in our basement at home. And I remember thinking, all right, these are interesting. And over the course of college, I started seeing some of them in theaters as they would screen. I remember seeing Clockwork Orange in a theater. My friend invited me out to. And I remember thinking like, yeah, that movie's all right. But there's something about seeing his films in a room that you can't leave that I feel like is very important to the experience. It just made me digest it in a whole new way and see things I'd never seen before, like most movies you would think, but particularly with his. And The Shining definitely applies to that. I think the first time I saw The Shining was at Wealthy Theater before I worked there for a Meanwhile. The first time I saw it in a theater was for a Meanwhile film series screening. And seeing The Shining in a theater is a unique experience, especially now in a room like that. I feel like it yields more laughter. I don't know if we're going to talk more about tone within the scenes later, but there was a lot more uncomfortable laughter within the film that I thought was unique, and I wasn't sure if it hindered with the experience or not. But it was still an incredible watch. So I'm a fan of the movie. I too, like Caleb, saw the Simpsons version of it before I ever saw the actual movie. So I see the movie now and I think of Treehouse of Horror.
Yeah. The Shining.
The Shining. Yeah, exactly.
Groundskeeper Willie. Classic. I like what you said, Chris, about being trapped in a room with a lot of Kubrick movies, and especially with this one, because my question to everyone is this the best or worst quarantine film of all time, as far as being trapped in a place, maybe with people you love who are also very difficult sometimes, and maybe you grow to not love so much, or you go on a journey with, let's say, like this wonderful family in this film.
I will say that I definitely related to that question when you asked, and not necessarily even really due to quarantine, but I am currently and historically from Florida. I'm currently in Florida. I'm from here. I lived in Michigan with you fine folks for 5 years. And about 3 years ago, I think it was, we had that particularly heinous blizzard where we were all quite literally trapped inside. I think I didn't leave my house for close to like 8 days. I know that work was closed, school was closed, like all these, like, you know, roads, you couldn't get to them. I remember having to have like neighbors like help me dig my car out and stuff, to where I was like, oh, cool. This is only something that I've ever seen portrayed in film or television, in the motion pictures. You know, I had never really experienced anything like that. But I will tell you that there's something very, the word scary is the best word that I have right now in my vocabulary for it. But looking out and seeing snow kind of piled high to my door, looking out and realizing like, oh, cool. Like we still have power, but like pretty much the food in my pantry and what's in my fridge is like what I've got for like the next, who knows how long, because they have not plowed this road that I live on. You know what I mean? That idea of truly feeling trapped, I hadn't really experienced it before. And so now when I think of this film in particular and remember that experience, it really does kind of like, it weighs even more. And I know that you guys just had some snow. I am in the land of alligators and humidity, so like I can go outside, but with the pandemic, you know, I was talking before we got on mic, like my kid doesn't really go anywhere. Like we had to go to the DMV today and we both had to be there, and he was like waving at everybody because he was like, other humans, this is amazing, you know.
Oh, same. I mean,
yeah. So like that idea of confinement like that, that this film really hammers home. And also, I think, to what I know Hayes will unpack later, a lot of that scoring is so oppressive audibly, that you feel confined, you know. And a lot of the framing, a lot of the way that things are shot, it's tight behind him when he's on his big wheels. It's, you know, there's these tight intentional shots that are kind of juxtaposed with like, you know, the wider, you know, full shots of the hotel. Like they don't but that's basically all you're seeing is like the hotel. You're not necessarily seeing outside of that opening, you know, kind of title sequence when they're getting to the Overlook Hotel. We visually follow them on that journey. So you don't really, once you're there, you're kind of just there. And my particular experience with Kubrick before this and during all this was, it was actually the first thing that I ever programmed was a Stanley Kubrick Film Festival for Florida State University when I was in college in 2010. And well, I was a programming associate with our year-round program, but this was a thing that, shout out to Bob Howard, who is the former director of that program. It's phenomenal. It's a student-run, student-led film program. It's like a 300-seat movie theater. And we ended up getting both Jan Harlan, who is a producer on multiple Kubrick films. He started on Barry Lyndon and basically went through, I believe, AI, which was not a Kubrick film. He went through Eyes Wide Shut, but then he also was a producer on Stanley Kubrick, A Life in Pictures, because he's married to Christiane Kubrick, who's Stanley's sister. And he was actually in the helicopter with the DP when they were getting those wide shots. So we had him come to Florida State and he like hung out with us for a few days, and he does a lot of student stuff, and that was really cool. And then we ended up actually, one of my dearest, oldest friends happens to be the nephew of Vincent D'Onofrio. So I was able to actually get Vincent D'Onofrio to come, and we did a Full Metal Jacket panel with Jan and Vincent, which was really fun. Cool. And they hadn't seen each other since the filming, which was so great. And so they got to kind of reunite and then tell us all these like stories. But it was cool because similar to this film, we're seeing a lot of these themes that pop up in Kubrick's work, which is a lot of, a phrase that we now know, which is toxic masculinity, but a lot of that idea of that being wrapped up into some sort of psychosis, right? And violence. And, so it's a really good, bad movie for quarantine because it makes you feel all of those oppressive feelings. And especially now having gone through snow and stuff. That was such a long response, but like I have a lot of feelings, I guess, about being cooped up. It is. I can't believe you watched it 3 times, to be honest, because even like looking at some of the stills now when we're like going through, I'm like, oh, nope, don't need to see that again.
Well, here's the progression. I watched it the first time just cold, without anything, just watching it to have the experience, Second time I watched it taking notes. And then after I did all my research and everything, last night I watched it for the 3rd time. And incredibly, after all of the crazy conspiracies and research and rabbit holing, watching it last night, there were like 4 things that I noticed that I've never seen before or seen anybody talk about before, which I'll bring up later. How in the world? It's so richly textured and layered.
You did that to yourself 3 times, so your brain was probably like, help me, and needed to find the new things to look at and to like parse through. I'm
kind of a masochist for harsh films, actually. That's a surprise to everyone listening. Hayes, Chris, you got any good off the top of your head quarantine films or stuck in one location at odds with a small group of people films?
Misery.
Nice.
Misery is really up there as far as that category goes, I would say.
Just had a discussion with a friend about that movie the other day as related to our current experience in life right now. But yeah, that's a great recommendation. I love that.
That's cool. The correct answer is John Carpenter's The Thing, but we'll let it slide this time.
Yeah, The Thing.
I lost this round. Cue the buzzer.
We are keeping score. So.
Interesting that both Misery and The Shining are from Stephen King, right? I wonder, there's something about his voice that connects with the quarantine world in some way. I find that interesting.
Maybe because he stayed at home and wrote a lot.
Well, honestly. I was even reading that he kind of put a lot of himself into the Jack Torrance character because he was dealing with writer's block and, quote, aggression towards his family at that time. And I was like, all right, you sound like a pile of fun to live with. I wanted to mention, too, there's a great film by a director named Josh Rubin called Scare Me. It's a newer film. It's out on Shudder right now.
That is a good quarantine watch.
It was so fun, and it is that same contained, but there's an element of like dark comedy to it. So if you're looking for that kind of feel, but with a little bit of levity, I definitely would recommend checking it out because it was very, very fun.
Yeah.
So, you guys want to do Context Corner?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you feel like eventually we should have theme music for Context Corner?
I mean,
good. I know a couple of people who make music around here. Whoa!
Yes,
that came out of nowhere.
All right, guys, what are we doing? Right? Is it not
coming on down to Context Corner?
Oh, yeah, yeah. A little more down to Context Corner.
A little more context. There you go.
That was so good.
Give me some context there, Caleb, will you?
Wow, I'm stunned. I'm completely taken aback.
Chris, we're getting 50% writer's credit on that one. Okay, I think that was a collaboration there, right?
Good deal.
Speaking of great collaborators, let's talk about Kubrick just for a quick sec, in case people aren't familiar. There's a reason he's quote unquote Stanley Kubrick, and you've heard of him. It's mostly because he made 11 feature films, and 9 of them are arguably masterpieces, which is some kind of track record. He spent a lot of time on them. That's 11 features over 43 years. So he's not as prolific as some other directors. But when you're talking about movie for movie, what are thought of as masterpieces or great works, they're all there. I didn't know this, he was literally a genius, 200 IQ, which, looking into that a little bit, and I may be a little off here, but pretty much anything over 180 is like off the charts, like profoundly gifted. He was a voracious reader. He was obsessed with film, all kinds of film from a young age. He was a professional photographer for Look magazine in the late 40s, which is sort of the competitor to Life magazine. He started out making short films with very small, if even existent crews. So he definitely learned by doing. He said the best education in film is to make one. And he started, his first feature was in 57, I believe. But even if you just consider the run of from 64 to 87, Dr. Strangelove, 2001, Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, The Shining, and Full Metal Jacket. These are all like major movies. He didn't really have any stinkers in there, which is just incredible. He was a notoriously demanding perfectionist. He was obsessed and involved with every little detail of production. He was also notorious for dozens, if not hundreds, of takes of scenes. The Shining was a great example of this, where he used the technique of absolutely wearing down his actors to get them to transcend to another level. Virginia's just dying to add to this.
Well, I want to open this up for a little bit, because
Sure.
you said his actors. Mm-hmm. And I think it's fairly well known that with this film, it was particularly just Shelley Duvall, because, I don't know if it was because, Jack Nicholson was the more name actor, or because he was sort of, the lead of the film. Although one could argue that when you only have 4 characters in the movie total, like, you're kind of all co-leads, but I digress. Mm-hmm. Like, it's fairly well known how brutal his filming techniques were, mm-hmm. as it pertained to Shelley Duvall. So as fellow filmmakers, Chris, you hyped yourself up a lot earlier when you were like, I'm a pseudo filmmaker / actor. You guys, this guy
I think
is
like big shot actor,
truly
actually.
One of the best actors I've ever seen. And like, he was so humble to like give it, like, he's truly one of the like most also like diverse actors. He can give you like comedy, he can give you scary, like Red Skies. It's still, I can't. Anyway, I will link all the stuff that he's in, but I'm curious for y'all who are film lovers, filmmakers, film, critics, really. What do we think about that as a directing style? Because if we're comparing that to something that would be more of, more natural techniques, right? Like a Before Sunset kind of a vibe, like a Linklater, like a very low key is the best way that I can describe it. How do you feel about that as a technique to get a performance out of an actor when there are so many other ways that a director could theoretically do that? Because Shelley Duvall has kind of gone on record saying that like movie psychologically broke her down, So I'm just curious.
It psychologically broke me down, and I was just watching it. So, I think that, the ways that he terrorized Duvall and instructed other people to terrorize Duvall on this film obviously are going to be a point of contention for people and be very divisive, but it's not like he terrorized every actor. And it's not like he picked on her just because he didn't like her. I would say that whatever his methods, her scene in the bathroom as Jack is axing his way into the room, I think it's one of the greatest examples of terrified acting, whether it's real or whether it's fake. I mean, I've never seen someone look so afraid. And you're trying to make the scariest movie ever made. Why would you compromise?
But we're talking about it's at the expense of somebody's mental health and well-being. Like, I think that there's some compromise that could be had there. I don't know. It doesn't need to just be between me and Caleb arguing, you guys. Feel free to add whatever you want. I'm just curious. I'm just, as you know, because I am and I'm going to pull a Chris, I'm a director. You know, I've done very minimal projects in that realm. I started off mostly as a producer, but the more that I go into directing and the more that I'm in pre-production for a short right now, like, I feel like that would never have been the way that I would try to, you know, get something out of an actor. So Chris, especially as an actor, like, how do you feel about that as a technique when it becomes something that obviously is like affecting your mental and physical and emotional health? Like, do you think that would be worth it for you in a performance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was thinking about that a bit before this. I think in the example of Shelley Duvall, that's a good example of maybe the extreme going too far. Me as an actor, I love it. I come from a theater background where you have weeks of rehearsal before actually doing the show in front of an audience. And I did most of my training and early work in that world. And then when I started doing work in the film world, especially when you're doing work in like independent film or on short films or on your friend's film where you have 15 minutes at this copy shop and you got to get off location really, and you only maybe get like 2 takes, there's not really a lot of opportunity for rehearsal. So your preparation kind of comes into play differently. So when I hear stories of David Fincher and Kubrick and others like them who try to kind of break through ground and find something different, I kind of admire that and would love to live in a world like that for a project. I listened to this interview with Nicole Kidman. She was on Mark Maron's podcast a few weeks ago, and she talked about working with Kubrick on Eyes Wide Shut. And she said something interesting where she thought that Kubrick seemed interested in getting to the place of something unexpected and something of surprise. And in conjunction with that, I think that works with an actor like Jack Nicholson in a way who is sort of interested in finding those moments of spontaneity and something different within a take. I think you see it in a lot of his work. He wrote this intro for an acting book. If he ever wrote an acting book, which he totally should, and he's still around, I don't know what he's doing, but Jack, if you're listening,
and he is,
yeah, and he's listening. Hey, Jack, I would love to hear your insights on the craft in general in a form like that. But he said something about technique and how, like a technique for an actor, he had conflicting feelings about. So as much training as he did do, and as much technique as you can even see him doing behind the scenes in the making of this movie, he talked about how there's something gypsy about it, and getting to this space that's like just uniquely you and uniquely spontaneous. I think the extra takes kind of help that and help break through a performer getting out of their own way. I don't know, Hayes, if you have any thoughts as far as being in the music world, finding spontaneity within your songwriting or your music playing, if there's similar approaches when it comes to...
I hear you saying like finding a zone after doing a million takes. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. You know what I mean? I can't say that my engineers and producers were psychologically manipulating me behind the scenes and terrorizing me in order to get the best performance out of me. But there is something to breaking through that wall, I think, you know what I mean, and kind of getting through that base layer. But I will chime in with my opinion, because it seems like we're asking opinions on like the kind of the morality of this thing. Like to Chris, it sounds like Chris is interested in that type of experience with Kubrick, you know what I mean? Like, so to me, there's like this this question looming, like, is it elective? Like, are you going into this knowing that this guy's going to do crazy stuff to you? And if it's not elective, then that's psychological, like that's abuse, and that's wrong. You know what I mean? That's my opinion.
You have a point, and I think maybe that's just what I was getting at, is like from everything that I've kind of read and experienced, and that she's kind of spoken about it, it's like, but I'm not an actor, right? Like, the most that I ever did was like for a short that my sister wrote and directed, and halfway through I quit because I slipped and hurt my butt because I slipped on concrete. And then she wanted me to do more takes, and I was like, "No, I'm done." Like, I
What a
literally was
trooper.
like, listen. Have you fallen on concrete before? I could barely walk. She wanted me to run up and do takes again. No, thank you. No, thank you.
What a
So-
tyrant. Sounds very Kubrickian.
I'm just saying, I don't think it was her fault, but I also was very much like, yo, I'm done. So there's a part of it that, especially from my very limited experience of being a quitter, like because it felt like it wasn't what I was signing up for. And also I was tired, my butt hurt. I didn't feel like I was able to like do that again. And in my mind, I was like, didn't we get it? It was just me running up the stairs. Like, didn't we get it already? You know? And so I think that's what I just keep coming back to, is it like, to your point, Hayes, is it what you were signing up for, or is it not? And I can't imagine that on a film with the budget and scope of The Shining that they wouldn't have had rehearsal enough. I guess, and everybody's, accounts of this, I'm sure, are different. And a lot of what I've heard is that, he just wasn't particularly happy with her performance. But we also know that there's a history of actors being replaced if they're not necessarily giving what the director is wanting. So I don't know, I guess. And I think now, present day Shelley Duvall, as we know her now, there was that really like infamous and I think exploitative, Dr. Phil episode with her a few years ago. She's obviously suffered a bit more trauma since then. So I think I'm also thinking about through the lens of 2021, and maybe not the lens of 1979 in production for the movie. I just wanted to bring it up in terms of production and creative choice, because so many of, I think some of the like best performances really fall under this like cinema verite category, So it's like, I think there's two schools of thought there, where you can really push somebody to the brink of unexpected, or can you just kind of almost fly on the wall style, be there to catch the unexpected? You know what I mean? It just, what the beauty of filmmaking, I guess, is that, and storytelling, is that there's a lot of different ways to get to the same outcome.
Yeah, endless techniques. And I know that one of the reasons that Kubrick's productions took so long is that he was known as someone who would sit and have one-on-one hours-long conversations with actors and spend the time with them.
God, that sounds so annoying if you were not. Like, I'm sorry, that sounds terrible if you were just like crew on that. How annoyed would you be? You'd be like on the martini, ready to go home, and then 3 hours later you're still there because he has to have like a feelings conversation with somebody. No, I would be so, I would have quit that too. I'm gonna be honest.
Well, speaking of Context Corner, by around 1978, if you were asked to be involved in a Stanley Kubrick film, you were ready for whatever, including a 51-week shooting schedule. 51 weeks, that's a year. It was supposed to be 17, but 51 weeks. That's just shooting. That's not post-production. That's not editing. They just shot for 51 weeks.
That's like Lord of the Rings level kind of stuff. And they shot 3 Lord of the Rings movies in that time with like multiple battle sequences and like 30 days of night shoots. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. That's excessive.
Well, Kubrick was only topped by one person once, And of course, it was himself. The Guinness World Record for longest continuous shoot is Eyes Wide Shut, 400 days, 15 months of continuous shooting for Eyes Wide Shut.
Do we want to bet that like every day Tom Cruise was like, yeah, this is amazing, making movies.
Yeah.
It's so great. Like day
Yep.
400, he was just as amped as day one.
Oh yeah.
Like, can you believe we get to do this? This is amazing.
That's great. Yes. What do we want to talk about next? I didn't want to get too much into the King to Kubrick adaptation, just because I feel like if you love this movie and you haven't read the book and you don't plan on it, you know, it's an interesting part of the story, and notoriously hated by their authors. Adaptations are sort of interesting, but we could kind of go off on a whole tangent with that. I don't know if anybody has any other examples of successful adaptations that just can't seem to get along with the original source material.
I don't know about that necessarily, but I do know that when they remade this as like a mini series, they did stick to the original novel ending, which like I think it's fine to spoil a movie that's currently 41 years old, but with the boiler and everything exploding.
Right.
So I thought
the
it was
destruction of the hotel is what is what happens in the original novel.
Well, and really the idea, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, like I think that the differences between the novel and Jack's characterization and sort of the way that he turns in the novel versus the way that this film is presented, it was an interesting choice by Kubrick to basically make him the antagonist from jump, right? Like in the novel, he's a bit more of like an okay dad, and he isn't like, it's not that through line of him just being generally terrible. There isn't like the hints of like, oh, he abused his son and probably his wife, you know. It's more like he gets possessed by the spirits of the Overlook Hotel, and then that slowly is what kind of adds, you know, this weight to his decline. But even in the end, he still kind of allows them to get out before the boiler explodes, and he, spoiler alert, dies with it. So it was just an interesting choice, but I also think that probably was Kubrickian in that, because if we look at a lot of the other main characters, I specifically am thinking of Vincent D'Onofrio's character Pyle in Full Metal Jacket, right? Like there's that very like looming scene where he's in the toilet and he has like the shotgun and everything, you know. So I think the examination of ethics, morality, mental illness, alcoholism, right? They all kind of play into a lot of these kind of character soups that Kubrick likes to like go back to a lot. And I think that that's interesting, given that the original source material does have Jack being like kind of a more sympathetic character, at least at the beginning. And also they also play up, you know, the kid, why am I forgetting the son's name?
Danny.
Thank you. He's like more overtly psychically gifted in the novel too. He's not kind of like hiding it as much as he kind of is in the movie. He bonds with the caretaker a little bit more. They're both talking about it a little bit more than they are in this film. So in that way, again, I think it just plays into a lot of the like intentionally misanthropic, you know, like he's a bad guy. We're kind of getting that from the jump, that Jack is like not a great guy, and the novel kind of is a little bit more nuanced. So
yeah, I mean, I think that Kubrick read it and he got a different thing out of it than what King put into it. But I think that speaks to the interesting way that works of art always hit people differently, and the question of whether, you know, how much ownership does the artist have on their work once it's out there in the world, and how much ownership does a reader or a watcher have on that art and what they project onto it. But did you, Chris and Hayes, have you guys read the book?
I have not read the book, actually. Yeah. What do I want to say? Yeah, before I jumped on here, I did the Cliff Notes version because I wanted to know how it, you know what I mean? Because I honestly, I've read a bunch of Stephen King novels. I was more interested in watching the movie and knowing what the source material was than actually reading it. Chris, have you?
Same here. Yeah, I have not read it either. But came to the movie first. Definitely loved it. I'm interested in reading it, especially this year, given the quarantine-esque nature of the story.
Why would you do that to yourself? I literally I don't understand why you guys are like adding on to this. Like, I cannot wait to just go watch like The Sound of Music to cleanse my palate, because I need the hills to be alive. I need them to just be roaming and open and free. Like, the fact that you guys want to add on to that, that's cuckoo bananas to me. I'm sorry. Sorry to use such foul language. I know
Yeah, we'll edit it.
Yeah.
That is cuckoo bananas, you guys.
Yeah,
It
well,
like
it's
a healthier option.
yeah. It is very strange that almost all of the film's iconic plot devices or scenes, everything that you think of when you think of The Shining, even if you've barely seen it, are not in the novel. And you can imagine what that would be like to write a book, have it be moderately successful. One of the world's great directors wants to make a film about it, adaptation of it, and then he makes up all this stuff, and everybody loves it. And for the next just decades, people reference that stuff with the name of the book that you wrote. Wouldn't that just be maddening?
I mean, I could definitely, I can empathize with that for sure. The checks probably helped alleviate some of the pain on that.
Yeah.
But yes, it would be maddening. And it's one of those things, though, like, I mean, if it's going to be made into a movie, and especially if it's a Stanley Kubrick movie, like he claims like ultimate ownership over everything within his realm. Like you said, you know, that's why he was so slow to put movies out and all this stuff. He was deliberate and all that kind of stuff. So even if he's taking someone's novel, he's going to make it his. And I think that's probably, you know, if Stephen King wanted a film adaptation that was true to his book, he shouldn't have got, you know, they shouldn't have gotten a director of that magnitude.
Yeah.
Right.
I can agree with that.
Well, so interestingly enough, I have a bit of context corner that's not even in your document. I can't believe it. This has happened.
A 10-page document here.
Yeah, it's because I listened to a podcast called "How Did This Get Made," which is a real great comedy podcast, and they recently did a film called Lawnmower Man 2, which is a sequel to a film called The Lawnmower Man,
which I have seen, and
so
it is something.
That film is based on. It's a short story by Stephen King. What happened is New Line Cinema had the rights to the film. They ended up making this other film that has nothing to do with that short film. And actually, I think was based on a play called like Cyber God or something like that, because it has to do with computers. And New Line basically was like, well, we got this name and property. Let's just tack it on there. And apparently they were contacted by Stephen King's estate like multiple times to be like, oh, you can't put his name on this because it has nothing to do with it. Because they would put Stephen King's The Lawnmower Man.
Sure.
And multiple times New Line was like, sure. And like 3 different times they came back and they were like, seriously, don't put his name on here. And New Line was like, seriously, we don't care. And they kept doing it, right? And then finally they got threatened with a lawsuit. They said, sure, we'll take it off. So they took the name off, and then it was just The Lawnmower Man. And then when they released it on DVD and home video, they put Stephen King's The Lawnmower Man. And it is hilarious because it has nothing to do with his movie. So this poor fella, this has happened to him many a time, apparently.
That's a whole other podcast episode in itself. The history of Stephen King adaptations. Why is it so difficult to make a great adaptation? And you know, you look at some of the most successful adaptations of King's to film are his non-horror works, like Stand By Me or Shawshank Redemption or something, where it's like, why can't anybody get the horror right? I mean, I'm not saying that no one can get it right, but time after time after time, it's lacking, or people are disappointed, or he's disappointed.
Or they just change it. Because I will say The Mist is a really great film, but that ending is a little bit different than the ending in the novel too. So it's like they're always trying to just tweak it just a little bit.
Chris, did you have something there?
No, I didn't have
Oh.
much there.
Okay.
I love Stephen King's work too. I don't want to go too much down a different direction.
Right.
Makes me think of like when I think of the best horror adaptations of Stephen King, like Christine comes to mind as
Yeah.
one that doesn't get talked about enough.
Christine's very underrated.
Yeah. But you're right. It's interesting. The acclaimed ones don't tend to be the horror. That seems like a funny paradox given how great his horror is on paper.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it just came out within the last It and It Part 2. They
Right.
redid, but also weird guy, weird stories. Let's just be
Well,
honest. Weird
those
stuff in there.
also radically differed from the original book
right.
to a degree that disappointed a lot of fans. I didn't see them, but you know,
I was disappointed that I had to see a menacing clown everywhere for about 6 months. Then
yeah,
like,
that's true. Speaking of horror films, how do you guys think this film builds a sense of the horrific or tension or dread without really relying on much gore at all, many jump scares? Hayes, what do you got? There's no monsters in this thing or anything, really.
No, man.
So-
But we have some of the scariest sounds ever created by modern human people.
Let's talk about those sounds.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's like, this is, to me, this is like, as like I'm not like super well versed in Stanley Kubrick. I'll admit that, you know, like I've seen the highlights, you know what I mean? But I'm not a scholar of film. But the use of sound in this movie seems like such a Kubrick thing. You know what I mean? It's all about the like slow, intentional build of tension over like we're not talking minutes. We're talking like tens of minutes. You know what I mean? That he'll like stretch, and you're just like,
Mm-hmm.
the entire time, you know. And it's a picture of a beautiful mountain in Colorado.
Yeah.
But I think so. It really starts with like his use of avant-garde composers, because this is like the exact opposite. I think the last time I was on here, we were talking about Home Alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And John Williams, right? Like the composer, he is like the polar opposite of like the musical direction that was used in this movie. It's very like sonorous and familiar to the ears, you know what I mean? And that kind of stuff. The average listener would probably argue that the music being used in this film is not music because it's like textural. You know what I mean? There are lots of like violin strings being like grated on with the bow, you know what I mean? Like over like really long periods of time. And the kind of difference that I'm talking about here is the difference between what we would call just like, you know, like European influenced tonal harmony versus modern avant-garde techniques that in fact like utilize systems of tonal organization. So like pitches, you know what I mean? Krzysztof Penderecki, the like one of the main composers who is featured in this film, was a student of Anton Webern, Igor Stravinsky. Like if you're familiar with the Rite of Spring, which was known for its like extremely dissonant kind of tonalities, that's because they were using these compositional techniques called like 12-tone composition, where they take every pitch that exists in the chromatic scale. Like, gotta bring my guitar out, you know what I mean? Like seriously, every pitch. Those are all the pitches that exist in music, period. You know what I mean? And they repeat in octaves. So they would have a system where you take all those pitches and there's kind of like almost like a key that tells you where to place them. And it sounds random to the human ear if you're used to this tonal style of composition. You know what I mean? Like you know what I mean? Like this like tension release kind of thing. Like tension and release in this style of music is created by like really high squealy sounds. You know what I mean? That just like build over time. And it's like to me, that is what makes the horror of The Shining. It's not the 300 gallons of blood coming out of the elevator doors or anything like that. It's the music of these, modern avant-garde composers. And hold on, let me look at my notes. Gordon Stainforth, who is the music editor for the film, because nothing was composed for this film per se. It was like a compilation of modern avant-garde works, so he was kind of like almost like a DJ would sample music, you know what I mean? He would take these huge chunks of avant-garde music and sync some of the like really high points of tension or action with high points of tension and action in the movie. You know what I mean? I think that was a lot of what I read said that like most of the 51 week like process of making this film, like a lot of that was he was like manipulating these very tiny details to sync the music correctly with the film, which is crazy to me. You know what I mean? So if you think about that, there's like a 10-minute build in these avant-garde compositions that leads up to a high point, right, of action. He was like very adamant about not editing the music or cutting any sections of it out. So he would leave the whole piece, which is why there's this huge 10 minutes long build into some scenes sometime, because he wanted to keep the music intact. So
that's crazy. Yeah. I mean, today no one would do that. You just cut it up, and
of course
2 minutes is fine.
Make a big explosion sound and everyone's like, oh, and like it's done.
Yeah.
But like, if you think about the opening, really what I call the opening scene of this movie is 20 minutes long. Like the exposition of characters or whatever is 20 minutes long. And throughout that time, you're getting these periods of like, when sound is happening in the background, when music is happening in the background, it's those low synthesized, like kind of dark pads with some like percussion, like really high twinkly percussion crashes. They happen at interval, and it just like reminds you of the tension, so it's almost like there's this 10 minutes, 20 minutes long swell that you don't realize it's pulling you in unless you're like looking for it, but it creates an immense sense of dread.
Yeah, especially those like when it builds to kind of like a cymbal crash and it cuts to one of those really abrupt title screens that's like Wednesday or whatever.
Yes.
Really, really horrifying for I don't know what reason. It's just horrifying.
For no reason.
Oh my God, Wednesday.
Yeah.
But it's scary.
But it's like, to me, it's the sense of foreboding, because like let's be real. If you've watched the first 20 minutes of The Shining, which is low on action, right? Mm-hmm. If you've watched the first 20 minutes, you know exactly what's going to happen at the end of the movie, because there's the hotel manager explaining like, oh, there was this guy who like murdered his entire family. And then, you know what I mean? There are all these, they clearly present you with these elements that's like, it's almost like what they call like target fixation, where you can see something bad in the distance, but by looking at it, you're actually like going towards it. You know what I mean? So they present you with these elements and you're like, oh no, we're headed toward that, but there's nothing you can do,
Yeah.
It's this like sense of confinement, I think, that like Virginia was talking about early on, and the music helps pack you into that box because you're in these tight frames. They're in this isolated place. And then to hear something that reminds you of like, how when like, if you notice a clock ticking for too long, it just drives you absolutely crazy. It's like that sense, I love this movie for that reason.
Yeah, he definitely sets up right from the beginning, the first shot, this sense of like just glacial dread, and you don't even know why.
It's beautiful, like mountain scenes, right? Like you're just like going through Colorado, like, oh, this is amazing.
But at the same time, I feel like rewatching, I didn't remember how frightening that felt. And I think it's the speed of the camera movement. It's the height of the camera movement. On the one hand, I'm forced to feel complicit in the horror because it's like I'm following these people's car. Whether I want to or not, I'm like the ghost following these people. I'm forced to be in that position. And on the other hand, just visually, I'm so high up, like it looks like I'm going to fall any second. And it really, when you watch it on a big screen, like that is amazing camera work. I think that's the first thing where it's just like, you're not in control here. We are controlling you. You're being propelled along, and you're in danger.
It's such an interesting, everything you said, Hayes. I was just like, the whole time I was like, so I love listening to you talk about music because every time I feel like I learn so much. I just recently saw Nomadland by Chloe Zhao.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of those wider following shots as well, because obviously she lives in her van and stuff. But just the tonal shift of it being more of kind of that light strumming music that you were, doing. It was like you feel complicit in this woman's freedom, in her liberation and not her confinement. So it's so interesting that I didn't even think about it until you said it, but that like tension and release that you hear it was like so tonally necessary, because it sets you up right away to be like, we're going to go on a journey and there might be some ups and downs, but at the end of the day, this character is like liberated. Yeah. There's an openness to it. And that I like didn't even put it together. I just watched Nomadland earlier this week, but I like didn't even put it together until you said that, because there were very similar,
of course,
not as high up, but similar, like of these like following shots that, these are the establishing shots that we could know for someone to be on a journey. It was so different, but also for all the parents out there, Igor Stravinsky is featured in Fantasia.
Yes.
That's how I knew that name, because I watch that all the time because of my kid.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I should have said that. I think that's probably most people's only exposure to Igor Stravinsky's music.
Listen, my kid, not even 18 months, he's a fan. That's all I'm saying, loves
Me and Igor
it.
were tight.
He actually does his little composing hands, because it goes like this, because he watches the guy and it's all in silhouette. So truly, nice. He's like, for real, like a fan now. And I was like, why do I know that name? Oh, right. I think that was like the dinosaurs one, or some, one of the sequences is just, and it holds a lot of that tension. But yeah. I didn't even think about that like release until you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's fun to see how composers, because you're talking about two different treatments with the same kinds of scene shots, right? It's weird. We're at a point in history where tension and release with sound is like it used to be expressed only in the John Williams kind of way, what I was talking about, you know what I mean? But we're finally getting to the point where like these early 20th century composers' music, like film has caught up with where they were back in the day or whatever, in terms of how trying to experiment with how to make tension and release. You can do it with like what I want to say, just purely volume on a single pitch, or you know what I mean? Just these weird kind of conceptions of music. But Kubrick is, like I said, this is total Kubrick, because 2001 Space Odyssey, it messes with sound in the exact same way. Like you feel this immense sense of loneliness and dread the entire time, right?
Well, and we did The Witch not too long ago too, and you were on that episode too, and you were talking about that same kind of stuff where it was, adding to that confinement feeling of like, okay, the woods are kind of outlining everybody, the music is going to kind of, and you walked us through all those really cool European instruments and stuff too. Why is it always Europeans? They be making it real tense.
Yeah, that is kind of true. Americans definitely love the tonal kind of music. We're all
we want a good resolve. We want to go, okay, the chord needs to resolve.
Yeah,
Europeans just go, it's not going to resolve, man.
Yeah, they figured it out hundreds
of years ago. There's no illusions
here.
Yeah. Right.
They're just
it's
like
never going to resolve.
Literally, I'm comparing like the dun 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 with just like a boom.
Yeah.
Forever. Europeans are like, sorry guys, you're in it now.
Yeah.
Stupid Americans. That's funny.
I also, rewatching this, I felt like the whole, I noticed for the first time, the whole opening from Nicholson going in to get the job interview all the way up until basically everyone leaves the hotel and we start the film with just them there. there's no cuts. It's all just dissolves. It's these very slow dissolves. And a dissolve makes you feel like you don't know how much time has passed. It disorients your sense of like, it's just disorienting in general, because you go like, okay, so where am I exactly? And he spends like 20 minutes doing that to you, of just like, something is not right here. Like, this is not how these scenes are supposed to go. And I mean, obviously he does a masterful job throughout the film of making you feel like something is not right. This information shouldn't be shown to me in this way. I swear that thing in the background moved. I don't think that thing was there before, which really just feeds into all the conspiracies and all the mysteries of this film. But, like I'd said before, he set out purposefully to make the scariest film of all time. And I think he knew how to do that was subliminally, and to tell not necessarily your eyes, but your mind that like something is off here. Did you guys have the same experience in the beginning of the film?
I definitely feel the same way about that. And upon my second watching, or not second watching, I've seen the movie a million times, but my most recent watching of the film, there's that line where he says, what was it? It's like, I feel like like as soon as I walked through the door, I felt like I knew this place, and like I knew what was around every corner. You know what I mean? And it's almost like if you're looking at those dissolves, like you're talking about it, I wonder if that's like the feeling that he was feeling in the midst of that. Like this
it's
isn't
deja
the way.
vu.
Yeah, like this isn't the way everything is supposed to be. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know, but that was just my kind of initial thought in thinking about the kind of weird, because it is dreamy, right? In some kind of way that it's presented.
For sure. Yeah, there's a lot of information that you can read about Kubrick micromanaging the sets and the props and the items in the frame to just subtly move them, which, like I was saying, you don't notice, like to the point where you could notate it, but your brain knows better, and your brain sees that, and it goes, something is off, get out of here. Reality is not progressing as it should be, which again, extremely Lynchian. And I haven't talked about the Lynch stuff yet.
Do it. David Lynch and I have the same birthday, so we got to talk.
Oh, nice. No, I just want to talk real briefly because having not seen this in a long time and being much more familiar with Lynch stuff, I really didn't understand the Lynch connection. I was watching this and I was like, this is the most Lynchian, non-Lynch movie I've ever seen. Well, the story is that, I mean, it's simple. David Lynch was a huge fan of Kubrick his whole life. And at the time that this movie was made, he actually screened this for the cast and crew and anybody he could. Kubrick claimed that Eraserhead was his favorite film. Eraserhead comes out in 1977, and he loved it. And the story eventually got to Lynch years later, and he was just like overjoyed that his hero loved his absolutely bonkers, weird movie. And when you start to think about Lynch films and sort of their unreality, their awkwardness, their random bouts of chaos and violence, their undercurrent of dread, it's like Kubrick and Lynch had this dialogue going throughout their entire careers. And that's why, I mean, watching this now too, the feeling that like evil could infect a place or could be part of a place that could get into you if you step into it. I don't think there's Twin Peaks without The Shining, which is crazy to consider.
Yeah, that I can see that now. I'll bite on that one, Caleb. I'll bite on that one.
Bite it. Yeah, I'd never made that connection for some reason. And I did not know that it was a specifically like, Kubrick saying that and Lynch being such a fan, but
it makes sense that they would.
It makes so much sense.
Have had like a mutual influence, because you're totally right. The way that they manipulate visual and auditory elements to elicit such a sense of dread and awkward. I love how you said awkwardness, because one of the things that I notice about like the first, we keep going back to that first 20-minute sequence of The Shining, where he's kind of like, he's being interviewed. He's talking with the people on the grounds, like the hotel general manager. That conversation is one of the most unsettling ones that I've ever witnessed on film. There's just something like really forced and Lynchian about it. You know what I mean? Like it almost makes you want to read behind what the guy is saying, even though he's pretty straightforward with all the stuff he's, he talks about the murder and all these things, but it's that same kind of like, almost like dream sequence style conversation that David.
Yeah, right. You have a dream, and in your dream, people don't talk the way that they do, but it made sense in the dream. But then remembering later, you're like, well, that's not how that goes.
That was effed up.
Yeah. It's just like this weird stiltedness that makes you feel like you don't have like solid footing.
Yeah, it's almost like the Lynch conversations where they're doing the dialogue backwards, but it sounds correct. You know what I'm talking about? It's like those kind of things.
Absolutely.
I just keep shaking my head because it all unsettles me so much. Like maybe I'm just a old school gal, but like give me a vampire, give me, a ghosty, give me some, I've said this before, I'll say it again. My sister and I, we have 3 S's: spooky, space, and sorcery. Give me a traditional spook. I don't want to be terrified by my own psychosis. Okay. I don't want that, because and I mentioned it in last week's Screen Club when Sarah had mentioned the new Netflix series about Hotel Cecil and how it's like real life murders and stuff and true crimes. And no, thank you. I just want to be scared by something that I know eventually will not get me. I don't want to be scared by myself in a photo from 30 years previous. That sounds awful. No, thank you. I don't want any versions of that. I don't want any violin strings just holding a note. Like, I don't like any of it. I'm gonna be honest. And
what about
if somebody's watching and they're going to tell me that it's terrible, that I just don't really like David Lynch. He's just not really my jam. I'm sorry.
No, I think there's definitely, it can be an acquired taste, but it's definitely, it's like what I was likening the like avant-garde composers to like the John Williams style composers, the like sonorous ones. There are rules in the world of John Williams. There are no rules in the world of the other folks, And
even with like supernatural stuff, there's always some new set of rules that the world is adhering to. And if not, and it's like the others, right, with like a Nicole Kidman vehicle, those rules are flipped on their head at the end, but the rules that we understood to be in place and the twist and the gut punch of that narrative is that those rules were upended after we've kind of established them. I don't like any of this. I'm gonna be honest. I don't want
That's hilarious though, because I would argue that Stanley Kubrick and David Lynch succeeded in their missions then.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Because you know why? I think we've all at some point in our lives like walked into like a small town grocery store and been like, I can buy eggs somewhere else. You know what I mean? I don't need any of that. I don't want to invite any spirits. I'm not trying to disrupt anything. And it's not like I'm going around, smudging places to try to get spirits away. But what I'm saying is like, there's too much of like real life that creeps in, and then the no rules just means anything can happen at any time, and all of a sudden your dad's running around chasing you with an axe, and I am not here for it. I don't want it. Can I have a vampire with extra long fingernails, please? Because I can run away from that. I can have garlic, I can get some holy water, I can circle of salt myself from a demon. Do you know what I mean? There are rules that you adhere to for supernatural frights. And so this thing where like, really, the scariest thing is your mind. No, thank you. I don't want that.
Sounds like you have some inner work to do, Virginia.
Listen, this is for me. This is for my therapist. We'll talk about it. I don't. Well, there's something about it where it's not my favorite.
We're talking about the fundamentals of what people get out of horror, which for you upends you in a way that is is not helpful. And for someone like me, it feels like it prepares me for when bad things happen in real life.
Or when you
I've
stay
seen
in a
them
hotel and
before.
get snowed in, and then
Yes.
your partner tries to axe you through the door. That's a preparation I don't need in my life. Do you know
Everybody
what I mean?
else is
Prepare
freaking
for
out,
a
but I'm like,
ghost.
I've seen this movie. I can do this. It's a survival thing.
No, thank you.
So, Chris, you know anything about Steadicam?
I know it involves keeping a camera steady.
Wonderful. That
It's
was
usually the
amazing.
go. For those who don't know,
Dang it.
might even
I'm
have
so
a
glad
fancy.
we have you here for these technical bits. Chris. It's
Yeah.
like,
No, it's okay. I just wondered.
Can't
I
believe I
thought
got that wrong.
that Sarah would bring the Steadicam knowledge. Does anybody else, before I go on my little thing?
well, yeah. So a Steadicam is a harness that you wear on your chest that has an extendable arm that typically bends on a few different kind of pivot points. So basically, a person wears it and it differs a lot from handheld, but still gives you a freedom of motion. So where something like Blair Witch Project is extremely and almost exclusively handheld, you see a lot of Steadicam stuff in running scenes where particularly they want to be close up, and maybe the use of a dolly track would be too far away, even with a lens that could get you closer up. You want to be closer into the action. And I really liked the comment that Lachelle has left on Facebook saying that the first use of Steadicam was in Hal Ashby's Bound for Glory. Thank you for that tip. Also, if anybody wants to add anything to our ramblings, please comment on YouTube, here on Facebook. But yeah, so basically Steadicam gives you that closeness and that intimacy that handheld would give without a lot of that kind of shakiness and chaos visually that happens to kind of just naturally come with handheld. Because if you're obviously a running body, the camera is going to pick up every movement of that run. A Steadicam allows you to kind of smooth that out in a way while still maintaining a lot of that intimacy. And fun fact, a lot of Steadicam operators are shockingly men, but it is now becoming a thing in a department where a lot more women Steadicam operators are kind of getting a lot more work in larger budget films, which is really cool. And they use them a lot in scenes where they want to create a spooky intimacy. But also, it's not always just for horror either. It's for kind of anything that you would want.
Oh yeah, I mean it's
something out.
Anything to move the camera along with the characters or whatever's happening.
Yeah.
right.
Keep it
I mean,
smooth.
it splits the difference between a dolly shot and a handheld, which there's issues with each one, but so this fellow Garrett Brown invented the Steadicam, with collaborating with a couple of other people too. But yeah, good catch on the first film to utilize it, which was 1976, so just a couple of years before they started filming The Shining. And The Shining was only the fourth feature film to utilize the Steadicam, so we're so used to it now. And by the way, if anybody's struggling to grasp what we're actually talking about, these are the shots following Danny as he big wheels around the hotel. These are the shots following Danny and Jack as Jack is stalking him through the maze at the end. There's multiple uses in this film, but some other famous uses from the period are the famous Rocky stairs sequence was Garrett Brown operating his Steadicam. Return of the Jedi, the speeder bike chase, is Garrett Brown shooting his Steadicam 1 frame a second, walking through the redwood forest, which I love. That's insane. For a lot of the shots in this, he was sitting in a wheelchair with that apparatus in front of him.
Which I'm assuming that was for the
interiors,
the big wheel interior.
Yeah.
Because that felt very much like a dolly in terms of smoothness and also how fast he was going. Because I don't think you could really, maybe somebody could run that fast, but those harnesses are fairly heavy.
Right. Yeah. And this really was born out of how much he hated poorly shot handheld sequences. And that's not really how the human eye sees things. You think about if you go out for a run, you know, you're bouncing all around, but you don't see what, you know, somebody with a camcorder would be seeing. Your eyes naturally sort of stabilize as you're doing that. And just the genius involved in him figuring out a way to do that. And it's just, I would have loved to be in audiences in the late 70s and early 80s, seeing shots like that for the first time. There's no way for us in the modern age to really experience that anew, but it just must have been as amazing to see as some of the innovations from, you know, the early 20th century or something.
Well, Kubrick too, he being as like kind of auteurish as he was, and how he really wanted things to look a certain way, for Barry Lyndon, he actually created a lighting system that was completely unique to that film. It hadn't been used before, where everything was like lit by natural candlelight. So they had to kind of alter and get lenses and cameras that could pick up the detail of the scenes with using minimal light. So like he has a kind of pattern of especially for the time period, using emerging technology to kind of really get the feel and the tone visually that he was going for, which again, it's so commonplace to us now, but to think about it, you know, 40 plus years ago, that is kind of insane, you know, 40, 50 years ago, that's pretty insane.
Well, and that speaks to his film obsession and just his desire to make great works no matter what. He looked at everything that was available, and he looked at everything that was emerging, and he just said, you know, how can I do this new thing? How can I be involved in whatever's out there at whatever cost? And fortunately, in the late 70s, he was in a position where he could afford to do that, and afford to have creative control over that. So do you guys have any specific production design stuff that you want to mention that you really think you like the look of, or you liked the feeling of at all?
Just this dress that I wore today.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yep.
that was it. That's my main production design contribution.
I had said before we got on that looks like carpet that was in like room 236 or 238. It's not the 237 carpet, but it's like the next room over. And speaking of carpet, you know, that famous carpet, right, that we're kind of looking at right now. I read an article in the magazine Film and Furniture, because of course, where they were trying to trace where the carpet design actually came from. And interestingly, the Kubrick archives had a hard time with it. So this magazine kind of made it their mission to find out. And a reader of the magazine sent in a picture from their parents' house in Germany, where one of the rooms was carpeted in this actual carpet. So this was not created for the film.
Europeans again.
Europeans, yeah. So the designer was a very famous designer, especially active in the 60s, named David Hicks. And this design is called Hicks Hexagon. And I'm assuming that Kubrick chose it for how well it works with his sort of one-point perspective and symmetrical framing. You know, everything goes into that one, you know, Danny's head in that shot. It all perfectly lines up with that and the symmetry of the sides there. But I also just wanted to bring up that Hicks Hexagon and the hexagon style, I mean, it has the word hex in it. It also has 6 sides, and Danny has a 6th sense. So that's just weird stuff. That's my first little dip into weird stuff. I don't know if you guys want to get into more of that or not.
Conspiracy corner. Good. It's lurking. We're lurking around conspiracy corner. I have a feeling.
And it's only a 3-hour lecture, so don't worry if you're.
I
feel like it does need a theme.
Oh yeah. Hey, just strum one string and hold it.
Hey, like perform.
Yeah.
Create. Ooh, conspiracy corner.
Well, that was so good.
That was great. Actually, though, before we get into that, we have to talk about are there 2 more beautifully stylized bathrooms in the history of film? The green bathroom and the red bathroom. Are you kidding me with these? Do you guys know bathrooms that look like these? Look at that.
I mean, but have you seen Kate Winslet's house in The Holiday, though? That was a pretty good bathroom. No?
No, I
saying.
missed that one, unfortunately. Is there a red bathroom shot in there too, Chris?
I don't know if we have a red one. I'll
The
keep
red,
it, though.
I might not have included it. The red one I know was influenced by an actual Frank Lloyd Wright designed bathroom from somewhere, but
I think I found it. I'll pull it up.
It's also worth looking at the various spaces. Oh, there it is. I just love it. It's so goofy. It's so strange. It's worth looking up the real life places that these locations were inspired by. Obviously, the exterior is a real place, although it doesn't include like the hedge maze or anything like that. Those were all invented for the film. But the Ahwahnee Hotel in Yosemite that Kubrick stayed at while he was conceptualizing the film has the same exact elevators, the same light fixtures. The lobby is so similar. I was really stunned to see some pictures of that place where, as a former photographer, he must have stayed there and just shot every inch of the place and just said, recreate this. Because we have to say, in case anyone's not aware, I was not aware, all of these interiors are constructed sets in Elstree Studios in England, which blew me away. The fact that these interiors are not real spaces, that they built them for this film.
You just blew my mind, buddy. I didn't know that. Yeah.
They feel so lived in and so real. And I just think it's one of the masterpieces of construction in a film like this.
Was this last photo, Caleb, the one from the original hotel he stayed at? It's like red elevators here. I think.
Yeah.
I think I have it. You're right. It looks stunningly similar.
It's exactly the same except for the little floor markers on the top, which Kubrick added so that he could sort of parallel them with some other imagery in the film that I don't even think we're going to get to, honestly.
What an amazing eye he has.
That's what I'm saying.
It's like a collector who is just finding all of these weird spaces of the world and recreating them for the films that he makes.
To psychologically torture us. Great.
Right. Yeah. Just to see something like that and go, you know what I could see happening there? I could see about 6,000 gallons of blood shooting out the side of that elevator.
Which I do have to say, thank you to Mr. Kubrick for giving myself and every person that's ever menstruated the greatest gift of all time. Because if I've ever needed to send something to someone to just let them know what's happening, I have it there. So, that's probably my favorite contribution of Stanley Kubrick to modern popular culture is specifically that elevator gif. So,
right.
Yeah. And I make that face a lot of times when I send it too. It's crazy.
Yeah. The illustration here is that these two things are being juxtaposed together, and knowing that he added those floor markers on top of the doors, obviously those are Danny's eyes. Obviously the screaming mouth is the elevator. And there are many other instances throughout the film of matching faces with things coming out of the mouth, which is a larger theme that, again, I'm not even sure we're going to hit, but it's interesting to see. And the next time you rewatch, I think you'll see a lot more of that.
I wonder if there's something in his study of subliminal messaging and imaging that ties into the kind of image matching of those two put together. The way they talk about was the Mad Max Fury Road, where they said they filmed the action sequences where everything was kind of aligned in the center of the frame to help just draw you in a little bit more with very similar framing, as different as those action sequences felt from shot to shot.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say, guys, if Sarah was here, she would have laughed more at that joke. I'm sorry. I needed more laughs for that.
Sorry, I'm sure they're happening at home.
That's kind of okay. Let me say something, bud.
I'll
say
add him in
this.
post.
That's probably like the nervous dude thing. Like, oh, do we laugh at that? Like, is it offensive if we laugh at that? Like you're allowed to make that joke, but like,
Sarah is probably watching right now, and I hope she's chuckling to herself. I'm just saying that joke deserved more laughs. That's all I'm going to say. Please continue.
I really do think it killed with the home audience, the thousands listening at home.
Our tens of fans.
So, okay, let's hit conspiracy corner real quick. I should say right up front, if you're probably aware of a few of the conspiracies, even if you are not super familiar with the film, and most of them are covered in various degrees of success in the documentary Room 237 that came out a few years ago, and that was definitely a lot of my source material for this. Although the documentary is a little bit rambling at times, I find. Some of the interview subjects seem to be a little bit more with it than others, but then again, I think that the filmmaker means to do that, to just sort of present this stuff and not say, one way or another, this is true, this is not true, whatever. But I mean, first of all, why are there so many conspiracies and mysteries that surround this film, but also Kubrick's whole filmmaking career? I mean, why is this guy so synonymous with, faking the moon landing, or hidden messages or secrets, or people being driven mad by overanalyzing his stuff?
I mean, I think he's one of those directors that when you reach an auteur status, which I think obviously he did pretty early on, and you have such a clear voice and tone and vision, I think it's really easy to kind of put that on someone who does work that is a bit unsettling, right? And it is a bit off kilter. And I mean, it obviously became mainstream, but if we're comparing it to other mainstream American cinema at the time, it was very different tonally. So I can see where stuff like that would be really easy to kind of want to parse and kind of figure out, because there are so many layers. There are so many times where, like you said at the beginning, there's like a prop moved just a little bit so that your brain registers it, even if you don't consciously register it. So I think that that's a really easy in, for people to be like, well, there's got to be more, there's got to be more to that. And also, we all know the moon landing was like fake. So it's like, no, just kidding. Sorry. Right.
How could there even be a moon if the Earth is flat?
Like, I don't even understand. Like Mars rover, try again. But I think that I feel like that's a really easy in, right? And from everything that I could see too, like he didn't necessarily discourage that kind of mythologizing of himself and his work, right? Like there is very much a mythology around him. And so I think with artists like that, I think that's a really easy in to kind of be like, well, he probably has 70 layers of this underneath, and I gotta get them all.
Yeah. Well, he didn't like things that were spelled out. He liked when things were enigmatic, and he liked a mystery. He liked art that lived and breathed and changed with you, and that you could see several times and get something out of it every time. A lot like David Lynch, where these guys they want to create something that's not one static experience that never changes. When you watch this thing and you see, you see Danny on the carpet, and in one shot he's in one place, and then the next shot he's in another place, you just feel like, well, why did that happen? And then you think, well, maybe I don't need to know the answer. Maybe it's just making me feel a certain way. Maybe it's not really as intellectual as you'd think it is. Maybe it's just meant to be a really scary horror film that unsettles you. The conspiracy stuff is its own podcast, honestly. I mean, the big The biggest thing is that Kubrick was hired by NASA to fake the moon landing, evidenced by a lot of numerology, a lot of 11s throughout the film. The 237 room, it's not only allegedly 237,000 miles from the Earth to the moon. Danny's got the sweater, obviously. There's a tapestry in the lobby that looks like rockets. There's Tang in the kitchen. I could honestly go on, but that's like the first level.
I mean, this all tracks
conspiracy
for
stuff.
me. So it's like you're basically just convincing me, and I'm sure the audience, that like moon landing was fake. So like I'm convinced, as you know.
Incorrect. The number one reason that Kubrick did not fake the moon landing, and this is officially on record, the timeline doesn't match up. The Soviets gave us the push to get into space in the late 50s. If their deadline, if NASA's deadline was to be on the moon in 1969, there is no way that Kubrick could have worked within that time frame and delivered a product on time and on budget for them. And it wouldn't, the moon footage wouldn't look like rubbish. It'd be beautiful. It would look like this film.
Or he made that astronaut do so many takes of that line that is what we got. You know, he was just tired and broken down, and that's what we were left with. You know, we don't really know.
Correct.
It would have a better soundtrack, I feel like.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
If he had done it.
Although, sorry, side note, can we talk about the sounds from Mars for like 2 seconds? How cool was that? Did you guys listen to those?
I haven't checked it out yet.
There's video, and it's literally sounds from Mars, from the rover that like landed. It's so, guys, everyone listening, it's so cool. It's like a very short clip, but it's like a 360 pan from the rover that landed, and they've captured sound, and it's awesome.
Yeah,
yikes!
Super cool. We're living in a crazy time, y'all.
The other theories have a lot to do with that the film is about the genocide of Native Americans and American expansion. There's another one that the whole film is a Holocaust allegory, and there's a lot of little weird bits that you can add to that. But I think that ultimately what those break down is that this film is about the cycles of forgetting or denying past horrors so that they can perpetuate. I think that what we're dealing with Jack as a father and as a person is someone who was abused and is unable to break that cycle, and in a larger sense what we do as a society, what people do, what nations do, whether you're talking about Native Americans or the Holocaust or any other kind of genocide. Like, I was really stunned when I heard somebody talk about the elevator and the blood. It's like the blood of the people that this elevator was built on, again, Native American burial ground, is blasting through those doors in a way that like the doors don't even need to open. The blood will get through. And it's like this generational pain reasserts itself and, in this one place that's so charged with evil from, these past traumas. And I think that there's a lot of the conspiracies that work in that frame, so it's all dealing with the same stuff. That's what I think Kubrick saw in it that King didn't necessarily see in it, or he saw as localized to more of his dealing with addiction and alcoholism and his issues with being a father and being a husband and being an artist. That's about as quickly as I can go through my 5 pages of conspiracy stuff. So, yeah.
I mean, I'm on board.
Yeah. You'd bite it?
I bite it. it.
That's my new favorite phrase.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
I'm on the hook.
Does anybody want to recommend anything that this movie inspired them toward or reminded them of? Or if you like The Shining, what's next? Anything like that?
There is a a television series called Room 104. It was created by Mark Duplass that
Mm-hmm.
was on HBO, probably now lives on HBO Max if I had to take a guess. But it is an anthology series that is based in a hotel in Room 104, and kind of everything that happens in every episode is it supernatural? Is it psychological? Basically, people are just not having a great time depending on the episode. But I really like conceptually the show. Mark Duplass obviously is famous for sort of popularizing mumblecore as a genre. If you've ever seen Puffy Couch, but he's also done stuff much later that did kind of have bigger budget, like there's like a fluctuation rather. But with this particular series, the whole point was that he wanted to write things that were contained to one location so that the budget could be smaller. It could become a more sustainable series, and it also allowed him to actually tap new directing talent. So he didn't really direct, I think maybe a handful of episodes, but didn't really direct anything. It became a vehicle to kind of tap new directing talent. And so if you haven't seen any of those episodes, I really recommend it because thematically, tonally, obviously each episode is different as it's an anthology series. But if you like, spook that is contained to a room, I liked that. And also, sorry, I'm seeing the comments on the side. Lachelle asked, what did anybody think of the recent sequel? Has anybody seen that? I did not, but I do love Ewan McGregor, right?
Yeah, I mean, sure, Ewan McGregor, but I don't think I can bring myself to see it based on what I've heard. Not that I've heard that it's horrible. I just don't. I think like this is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining that we're talking about, and that's what I've been watching. And if I was watching Dr. Sleep, the sequel, it'd be Stephen King's Dr. Sleep. So I feel like I might watch it after I reread the original book, maybe as a sequel to that. But it feels like it's so different from this film, and it's so, even though it pays homage to so many things in this movie, I know, I just sort of like don't need any more. Like I'm just like done.
Lachelle, what did you think of it? You tell us in the comments. What are your thoughts of it?
Yeah, because I've heard good and bad. I'm not saying it's all bad or anything, but Chris, Hayes, what about you guys? Do you have any further recommendations or Kubrick recommendations or winter stuff?
I honestly, I'm bad. I hadn't seen 2001 Space Odyssey until we were literally in an Airbnb our first trip up here when we were moving to Grand Rapids, and I was having a discussion with my wife. She was talking about Stanley Kubrick, and I was like, yeah, never seen 2001. And she was like, what? So if you're out there, and because it's referenced in everything, right? It's like The Shining, like you were talking about,
Right.
what I mean? There are all these cultural references, but we've never actually seen it. So I think if I could recommend anything, definitely for the people like me who are living under a rock, go see 2001 Space Odyssey. And also the composer that I was talking about, Krzysztof Penderecki, look up some of his works. There's a really famous one called Threnody to the Victims of Hiroshima. I would suggest listening to that one. It evokes a lot of the same feelings that you feel in this, and it's kind of like a landmark work in the style that kind of is used in this film. And that work, we didn't even get into this. There are all sorts of Lynch connections through Penderecki too, because Lynch uses his works in his movies. Threnody was actually featured in the reboot of Twin Peaks. So like there are all these crazy kind of connections that we can talk about there, but definitely go listen to some Krzysztof Penderecki, great composer.
I think that piece of music, listening to it again for this, I think it's the saddest, scariest piece of music ever composed.
Yeah,
like bar none.
It's
so horrific. But
it is.
The way that it's used in the Twin Peaks revival too, Lynch is making a point. If you guys are familiar with what I'm saying, or if you eventually see it, he uses the piece of music at a very key moment in the series where he's illustrating, I think, the point where human beings turn a corner where we become something, where we reach a point where we will never be able to come back from.
Yeah, it kind of sits in line with the original intention of the work, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, what do you got?
One that comes to my mind after talking about The Shining is a documentary, if that's fair to pick a documentary, but Film Worker. It's a documentary about Leanne Vitale, who worked as Stanley Kubrick's assistant for about, well, it was most of the second half of Kubrick's directing career. And he has an interesting story. Leon was actually an actor who was in the film Barry Lyndon. He had a role and was just enamored with Kubrick and how he worked. And the story is that he approached Kubrick and said, "Hey, if you're working on anything, I'd love to just give you a hand." And even as like a PA or something, just to kind of learn from Kubrick and the way that he worked. And he ended up becoming his assistant. His personal assistant on all of those projects. On The Shining specifically, he one of his major contributions was helping cast Danny, the actor who played Danny, and also basically being the director for Danny, which I thought was interesting. And as well as a director for significant chunks of Full Metal Jacket. He had a very interesting impact on a lot of Kubrick's work over the course of his career. And it's also an interesting look into Kubrick's own quirks and creative process and how he did what he did from an interesting angle. So it's called Film Worker. I would recommend that one.
Yeah, that's a great documentary. And if anybody wants to get deep into conspiracy stuff, there's a million YouTube videos for these kinds of things, but I would specifically recommend Rob Ager, Ager, and his channel Collative Learning. That's where I found the most insightful and the best presented arguments for a lot of these mysteries surrounding the film, which is weird to be recommending a YouTube channel, but really he puts it together so well. So
there's a recommendation for you, Caleb, specifically from the comments.
Oh yeah.
From Lachelle. She responded to our question earlier about what did you think of Dr. Sleep?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I expected it to be bad, but I actually really enjoyed it. It's a very different tone, but of course it is. I'd say once the glow of recently watching The Shining is over, give it a go.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, never say never. Except for the fact that we're running up against our deadline here. So we do have to say goodbye, even though after an hour and 45 minutes, I've got at least 42 other points
Pages?
to make. But
oh, sorry.
we're going to have to do a part 2. Yeah.
Volume 2.
Let's talk about what we're doing next month for a combo episode of Screen Club and Cinema Lab. Virginia, what's it all about?
Yeah, I'm excited, guys. It's Fargo and Fargo. Also, I just mentioned Nomadland again. It's like,
yeah,
I love her. Sorry, for everybody that's listening, you cannot see this still, but basically we are going to do a combined event on March 25th at 6 p.m. We're combining Screen Club, which is our series that dissects television, and Cinema Lab, which is our series that you're currently watching that dissects the motion pictures. And basically we're going to look at the first season of Fargo and the feature film Fargo. So come, as prepared as you can. If you've seen one, if you've seen the other, come and have a chat with us. We, as always, really like to do these as a book club style event. So as you can see, we've been interacting with everybody that's watching and commenting with us. So we love to have conversations with you guys. So come and join us on March 25th. As always, this is brought to you by Wealthy Theater, Grand Rapids Community Media Center. If you want to support independent programming like this, you can visit wealthytheater.org/donate. You can visit grcmc.org/donate. We are doing this on behalf of a nonprofit organization that has many arms in the community of Grand Rapids. But as we learned last week, with our wonderful Mystery Science Theater 3000 guests, public access, cable access, really community-based programming, even if it starts small or feels like it has a small reach, especially now with the internet, really has a global reach. And so you can always go to grcmc.org, wealthytheater.org, grtv.org, wyce.org. Did I hit everybody? I think I did. And you can listen to radio, you can watch TV, you can really support the arts that are continuously giving back to the community of Grand Rapids and the larger art-loving community of the world. And I think, it's been a hard year. It's been a weird 2021 so far. We talked a lot about feeling confined and being confined, but really I think this series, connecting with the audience, getting to watch it grow every month, it's been a real pleasure and a joy for me to be a part of it. And I just, thank you to the audience that keeps kind of tuning into us every month, because I know we can't be together in person, but this connection has been really fulfilling and enriching for me. And I think that that's why we all continue to show up and put on this programming, because we want to, expand media literacy, expand the way that we all talk and think about art in all of its different mediums. So if you like this, please, donate if you can, and just a share, a like, a follow. All of those things are great. If you don't have any actual cash, you can give us a bit of your social currency. Fellas, any parting words before we say goodbye to the wonderful folks that joined us at the Overlook Hotel?
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having us. Namaste.
Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in the comments, and I'd volunteer to be stuck in a hotel with you all winter, any day.
I will not go that far, but I do appreciate everybody, and
I'm
this
game.
was super fun. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Good night, y'all.